Finally, it's time for another dose of information in the world of Eternum. And it's about time we finally got ourselves even more news about Amazon's very own New World MMO. Today we're going to be jumping strictly into the settlement system and how those mechanics will work, with the addition of a bit of news regarding how the forts of New World will function. Without further ado, let's go ahead and slide right into it. So as many of you already know, during our journey in Eternum we will be coming across territory that can be claimed by us as the player. These territories can be engaged in both the player versus environment sense for things like the horde mode and upgrading systems, and also in a player versus player sense for the siege warfare. We just recently received a blog diving deep into the mechanics of each of these aspects with other details on how this is going to play out. It starts off by describing a settlement as a place of trade, work, crafting, faction missions, and a place of congregating between the masses. It's important to note here that alongside the settlements acting as a respawn point for the players, we also have the ability to place down our own campsites, which we can use to craft various base items or use for revival purposes. If you want to excel at exploring Eternum, it'll be very important to use that placeable campsite in conjunction with your settlement spawn point, just in case the settlement is too far for you to teleport back to. And personally, I'm really glad that we get multiple options for respawning, although it does make me wonder if fast traveling through intentionally dying might become a thing that people use as a result. If that ends up being the case, perhaps the loss of loot on a player versus environmental death in certain areas might be a solution. We'll have to see how that plays out to know for sure. And the next part touches on how we would go about claiming a settlement. During the early stages of gameplay, specifically at level 10, we as the players will have the option to visit between the three factions to choose one to become a part of. Once we're in our respective factions, we will have the opportunity to create or join different companies, aka guilds. And this does also play a part into the player versus player combat if you were wondering, but we'll get to that in just a second. When a company goes through its creation period, it inherits the faction of the person who created it, which means that if your guild leader chooses the purple faction, for example, you will have to choose it as well if you want to join them. It then goes on to say that companies can gain and control territory along with the settlement or fort it contains, and both of those do in fact serve a different purpose throughout the game itself. If the territory is not controlled, then it's as simple as paying an undisclosed claim fee at the territory's fortress itself. But if a territory is already controlled by a company, then we'll have to duke it out in the fires of siege warfare over control of the area itself. And this, as confirmed here in the blog, can only be done by companies that belong to different factions. Which means that if your company is looking at a territory that is already controlled by someone within your faction, you will have to consider another choice until that specific one opens up. I'm very curious on this aspect because it does mean that players will have to make careful choices on which faction they want to throw in with. And this ultimately could lead to a lot of espionage going on as a result. Things like players spying on faction choices within the beta to determine how their choice will be influenced at launch, or we might even see players completely switch their choice last minute to prevent competition with specific guilds. They state here that they will delve further into war and other related mechanics in another article. However, this does sound like we will not be able to engage in open world PvP with our own faction members as well, which is starting to sound like the method Blade and Soul had for their PvP system, but also many other games as well, including World of Warcraft and of course, Elder Scrolls Online if we count Cyrodiil for this example. This is something I do think could work depending on the incentives that you receive for opting into PvP, because it might promote more teamwork between players and guilds within their faction, but it's also something that might serve as more of a curse than a blessing in some circumstances. I think at the very least it might be better to have 3 factions as opposed to 2, because at least then it's less likely to lean so far in a specific direction like you would see with factions like the Horde versus Alliance. But no matter what, there's a good chance that there will be a dominant faction over the other 2, at least to some degree, and I'm very curious to see how that's going to balance out. And then they go on to explain what the difference between a settlement and a fort is. A settlement is where players own homes, craft, refine items, trade, and take faction missions and socialize. While on the other side of that, they say that a fort acts as a territorial major point of defense. It is what comes under attack during siege wartime or the invasions of the Horde. And in terms of the companies, it looks like the leaders of the companies that we create are automatically named governors, which makes total sense, but I must admit I was really curious about for the longest time. What I'm currently now even more curious about is if this propped up ship in this picture might be a future hat tip towards a naval system later down the line. First, we must master the world of Eternum, and then we can worry about making some fancy boats. Not only will the leader be the governor of the company, but they will also become the governor of the territory itself. Now ultimately, They state that the factions these companies belong to are the true rulers of the territory, while the company itself acts as a proxy for the faction they are a part of. And as such, the responsibilities that you would see being a governor would be as follows: maintaining control of your territory for your faction, upgrading and maintaining the quality of life in your settlement by starting town projects that result in settlement upgrades when complete, ensuring that there are enough funds to be paid towards the territory upkeep like we can see in this picture, and more, including adjusting taxes and fees in a settlement so travelers can assist with paying the upkeep. Taxes can be gathered as players craft, trade, and live in their house as the blog goes. But I believe the icons we see in the picture indicate a housing tax, a crafting tax, a refining tax, and what appears to be possibly a trading tax in the top right corner. This might actually be the tax we would see coming from the trading outpost, which for those of you that don't know, it acted as a sort of auction house for the players in game during the alpha phase, and we saw it in a few pieces of footage. And it appears to be making its comeback in an even bigger way. It's still unsure if these trading outposts will automatically by default be supplied with gear, resources, and crafting items that we can buy from the start, but if it isn't, then supplying the trading outposts will fall onto us as the player, with the tax coming into play to help with the upkeep of the territory. Also, it's really cool to see how we get to have our own emblems for our companies as well. Keep in mind that they did mention that players of the beta test may get some type of reward relating to our companies, and also that in the pre-order bonus we also do get access to a unique guild crest set that features different axes, muskets, and armor. Now alongside a governor, we also have what's known as a consul, which is a governor's second in command. A company can have as many or as few consuls as they would like, and the rank comes with the same permissions that you would see from a governor as well, which means that when a governor of your settlement is absent, that's when the consuls will come into play. I'd say that you'll only want to give this rank to people you trust, however. I'd imagine someone could do some real damage with over-raising the taxes on everything while the governor is on vacation for a week's time. And ultimately, that may even drive players from your territory and into the arms of others. This sounds like something you'll want to consider when it comes to choosing the territory you want, as well as the taxes that come with it. And in terms of how or what you can upgrade in the settlement, they do state in the blog that both the settlement's crafting and refining stations can be upgraded. Upgrading these stations enable higher quality and more powerful items to be crafted by the players that spend their time there, which is a really important thing for us crafters to remember, because we may not be able to access the next tier of refining or making gear until the settlement upgrades it enough. It'll be important for us to contribute to the town projects and missions that we'll be going into in just a second here. But it also states that we actually have our own lifestyle buffs and fort upgrades that are controlled directly by the governor. Lifestyle buffs end up being powerful, long-term bonuses for things like crafting and combat that only appear for territory residents. And just as I was asking myself what classifies someone as a resident, they state that to become a resident of a territory, you will in fact need to be the owner of a house in these specific settlements, which I have heard but cannot say much more about, that these will require a little bit of money saving to obtain. One thing that I'm really crossing my fingers for is gatherable resource nodes that we can unlock to place in our homes with the cooldown, or perhaps even refining and crafting benches of our own. They also say about this that if we do not own a house in a territory, that we will not receive the territory lifestyle buff, which does mean that we'll have to hold out hope that there's enough room for everyone. But they could also easily make the houses instance like certain games do when you have multiple people living at the same house location, but then having some sort of system to show off the best ones. For governors and consuls, the way you will be choosing these lifestyle buffs will be through the town projects menu like we see in the screenshot, along with the village upgrading and fort upgrading buttons. We also see options for weakening invasions and preparing for war. I cannot wait to see what kind of possibilities these give us, especially against the Horde itself. Now to really dive into these town projects a bit, we have the following information about what they are. These are large-scale activities that players can work on to upgrade our settlements. However, they do require a significant amount of effort and investment not only from the controlling company, but also the players that call that settlement home, which is something I really like, by the way, just to interject a little bit here. I'm glad that the game not only puts the opportunity to contribute in the hands of the companies, but all the player bases themselves. That might serve them really well in the long run as far as player interaction goes. But to get back to it, they also say that town projects get activated by the governors or consuls of the controlling territory. And as we can see in the screenshot, these projects award not only contribution points, but also money and experience. So if we wanted to try and weaken invasions, for instance, we could take a mission to hunt down 20 corrupted in any village, or for upgrading the carpentry station, we could go out and hunt a total of 20 wolves. And since anyone in the territory is able to contribute to these, if the experience incentive is good on these missions, I do think we'll see a lot of interaction from this with the player base. So as a controlling company of a territory, the weight of the upgrades won't rest on your shoulders alone. It's also important to note that alongside a settlement leveling up, it does have the ability to downgrade. This means that if players aren't interacting with the stations or conducting trade in your area, it's possible that you may not be able to make ends meet if you aren't putting in that work yourself. This harkens back to how important the territory location might be. If it's a central hub that a lot of players tend to pass through for trade, hunting, and more, you'll definitely see a lot more activity as opposed to somewhere like an in-game area. Certainly sounds like food for thought on this one. And to finish off this blog post, we get a description of how we go about joining the settlements. The blog states that while you can use the services of any settlement, to join one you will without a doubt need to purchase a house there. Anyone is able to live in any house in any settlement regardless of their faction choice or what company controls the territory. And if the territory were to change hands, the residents would still be ultimately unaffected, aside from of course the taxation, the upgrades, and lifestyle buffs that a new company might choose. But for the moment, it looks like that's all the details we have regarding the settlements and the territory aspect. I'm glad they went through this information piece by piece because it does paint a clearer picture of how things are going to work once we get in game. Now I'm very anxious to see what the housing blog is going to look like, and the dev diary that's still coming to us in video form. Don't forget to stay tuned for that one since it's still planned. And now it's time to discuss it. What do you folks think about the territory system we've talked about so far? Does it give you any new ideas of what kind of territory you want to capture for your company, or how you're going to choose your faction? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful night or day. And farewell.